Today's story was written by Reddit user In Yellow Clad. Humanity was on the verge of collapse, not due to political, economical, racial strife, or infighting, but because they had been burned off of every world they had claimed, hunted down like animals across the stars. 4 separate nations had banded together to bring an end to humanity, which was widely seen as the caring grandfather of the galaxy. For humanity had been amongst the first to actually step out of their own solar system, the first to colonize another, the first to make first contact, and from there grow into a powerhouse of economic, military, and diplomatic might. Many might compare humanity to one of those elder species that could be found in a space strategy game. A species powerful enough to simply ignore everything else happening in the galaxy till someone came along and poked the bear. However, instead of stagnating like those species would have, humanity had thrived, carved out a considerable portion of the galaxy for itself, and then set about helping everyone else do the same, starting with their closest allies. But that had been thousands of years ago. The galaxy was once a large place. Now it was too small, or it was considered so by the younger races, who had chafed under humanity's rules, laws, and minor control. Humanity had held everyone to the same standard, a standard that had survived till now because everyone could understand it. They called it the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. Those that were polite were met with the same. Generosity begat generosity. Fire and death would result in your worlds being put to the torch, as a lesson on the Golden Rule. Most learned quickly and settled into happy, fruitful existences. Squabbles happened, of course. They were bound to, but they were rarely the precursor to full-scale conflict. But that has changed. The former allies of humanity had been wiped out or pushed to the brink and left to rot, and humanity, strong as it was, could not withstand the coordinated assault of such magnitude. It began small, as these things do. A species' tensions begin to rise when many alien citizens began to complain that humans were taking their jobs or breeding other species out of existence, polluting the gene pool, some might say. From there, it escalated to discriminatory business deals and practices, and though humanity did their best, they realized this was something deeper than mere discontent with the status quo. And then came the blockade of 9-5, when the human company decided not to renew their contract with an alien mining conglomerate and instead forge a new contract with a far fairer company, one with their best interests truly at heart. The Skeeky Mining Guild blockaded the planet, destroyed the comms buoys, and prevented any sort of aid to be given to the colony. It took weeks for the news of this to reach the human government, thanks to meddling on the part of the guild and some very well-placed bribes. At first, humanity tried diplomacy, but when they were handed a revised contract that would practically ensure the entire colony was forced into indefinite indentured servitude to the guild, they rejected it immediately. Again, they tried diplomacy, but were rebuked and were shocked when the guild began to land peacekeeping forces on the colony, essentially enslaving the populace and forcing them into work as though the government had signed that contract. This was the final straw. Humanity deployed the 7th Fleet, the pride of their navy, to break the blockade and free their colony. Other fleets were quickly deployed as well, sent to other Skeeky Mining Guild holdings within their borders, and orders to evict with extreme prejudice if they were non-compliant. As expected, they were indeed non-compliant. The Mining Guild fleets were subsequently wiped from existence, after being given fair warning that lethal action would be taken if they did not vacate human space immediately. And when they didn't, that was it for them. Of course, many other species saw this as perfectly acceptable, till the Guild presented false evidence and doctored records, videos and logs that stated humanity had not even attempted diplomacy, had instead reacted to lethal means right out of the gate. This was a lie, of course, but there were too many discontented voices and hearts in the galaxy that believed it was all true. So began the conflict. The masters of the mining guild called on their government to go to war, to pay back the humans for their lost ships and innocent workers. Like gullible fools, they obliged, and they dragged in their like-minded allies. For 50 years the galaxy was in a stage of open conflict. Many of the less military powerful species were bullied into either fighting humanity or staying put, while the elder species rallied around humanity as they were forced to bring the galaxy to order. It did not go well for the upstarts at first. Nobody had ever actually seen the elder races in protracted combat before. Most combat encounters were practically over before they even began, as elder tech was vastly superior in many ways the younger species could not dream of quite yet. But the younger species had fervour and determination, but most of all, hatred. They did not waste troops on ground invasions unless a planet was strategically important. They simply glassed it. Civilians were on the menu as well. Nobody was spared, and humanity was forced to spend precious time and resources evacuating worlds in the line of fire, while their enemy simply moved in for the kill. Sure, the enemy lost many ships in their campaign, but the elder species started to falter. There was simply too much to coordinate, too much to do, and so they started to collapse. As ally after ally fell out of the war, soon only humanity stood, backed into a corner they had never truly experienced before. It came to a head when Sol was the only system left within their grip, and they knew there would be no surviving if they stood their ground, so they concocted a plan, a daring, desperate plan, one that would presumably save what was left of their species. As the fleet held the enemy at bay, civilians were forced onto massive colony ships, many placed into stasis to preserve them for the long journey ahead. There weren't enough ships for everyone, of course, and they were first come, first serve, rather than perhaps saving the best and brightest, or the most politically influential. With the colony ships crammed full, the fleets pulled back, and those civilians left behind were dropped weapons and supplies, armoured vehicles, and even given access to WMDs, to be used at their discretion. Even as the fleets fled Sol to guard the colonists, Sol fought on, fighting till the bitter end, for their enemy wanted to take Earth intact as a trophy dedicated to displaying their power and clear superiority. Sol fell within a week after the departure of the fleets, and the enemy hounded the refugee convoy all the way to the edge of the galaxy. Now, as everyone knows, space is empty, and the space between galaxies is exceedingly empty. Of course, this isn't entirely true. Space is filled particles, energy, and all manner of things that are invisible to the naked eye, but in the grand scheme of things, it is empty. Or so we all thought. See, the space between galaxies is a void, rather literally. There's maybe 1 or 2 rogue stars or planets out there, but they are so small that they cannot be seen, and so that space is a void, pitch black, impenetrable. Such a space was also incredibly vast. Trips between galaxies would take millennia at minimum to reach, with the distance growing every damn second. Yet that was where the humans were headed, on a direct course for a distant galaxy. Another thing about this region of space is that nothing ever returned from it. It was a death sentence. No probes or daring explorers had ever returned from that place, simply vanishing into the black abyss of space for the rest of time. So the pursuers thought the same way when they noted humanity was headed straight for it. They laughed, knowing that humanity would soon be extinct and they were now the masters of the galaxy. How wrong they were. For a rather peculiar thing happened when the fleet of ships crossed the threshold of our Milky Way. Lights along their hulls flared to life, angled out into the void and illuminating nothing. The lights flashed in a quick sequence, repeating itself over and over again before going out, and as their hunters watched, space moved. Space does not move for anyone or anything, and yet here it did. The thousands of ships sailed straight into the darkness, and the darkness moved out of their way. A briefly notable captain was the first to remark on this strange occurrence. "What in the name Zappa is going on?" he said just before the last human ship stopped dead in its tracks. Almost immediately, each pursuing vessel was struck by a ranging laser. Harmless, but it marked them all and triggered target lock warnings. And once again, space moved. A shadow closed around the small ship, cloaking it and the rest of them from their hunter's sight. And that's when it happened. A thing that would haunt this galaxy for eons to come. The empty space between the galaxies opened its eyes. Trillions of eyes opened and peered down at the ships that had pursued the last of humanity, and they looked upon those ships with a deep, ingrained hunger. Tendrils of wispy shadow stretched out into our galaxy, curled around the ships and held them fast. Great maws opening in the void that were somehow even darker than the void around them. Crews were plagued with sudden onset insanity, mauling, defiling, and torturing each other into oblivion, even as the things that held their ships drew those doomed vessels between gaping jaws. Then the tendrils slipped deeper, curling, winding their way into the galaxy. They visited Sol first, where the enemy had partied and defiled the corpses of their ill-fated campaign, much as it had upon those ships. Madness descended on the planet, and the beasts from the void feasted. Yet their hunger remained. The humans had been kind enough to tell them where they could find more food, more minds and bodies to consume, and so that is where they went, where the food was. The mighty fleets could not stand against them, and the defeated allies of humanity discovered that these beasts avoided them and their ships entirely, but everyone else was undeserving of mercy. They had proven that much with the rape of Keller too, with the sacking of Venus, the burning of Epsilon Eridani Prime. They had shown no mercy, and so they would receive none from the cold and cruel space between the galaxies. When it was over, nearly 90% of the galaxy had been picked clean, entire planets devoid of organic life. None had been spared save those that had stood beside humanity till they could fight no more. And yet the humans did not return. Many theorize that they're still out there, headed towards that distant galaxy in search of refuge. We dare not follow after them, for fear of the things that lurk between. We dare not test to see if they are still hungry.